Hasina's fingers flew across the loom, a blur of motion as she wove intricate patterns into the rich carpet. Threads of crimson and gold, sapphire and emerald danced under her touch, transforming into blooming flowers and soaring birds. She was known throughout her village for her skill, her ability to create breathtaking beauty with simple wool and silk. But beauty could not feed a family, and a heavy debt hung over Hasina's household. Her father, a farmer, had suffered a series of bad harvests, and the moneylender, a cruel man with a heart of stone, demanded payment. The only solution, her parents decided with heavy hearts, was to send Hasina to the palace in Shiraz. The prince needed a new weaver, and the payment offered would settle their debt and ensure her younger siblings wouldn't go hungry. Hasina, though her heart ached, accepted her fate. She was quiet and small, but possessed a strength that ran deep within her. She would go to the palace, earn her keep, and pray for the day she could return home to her family. The morning of her departure dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the gloom in her heart. Her younger siblings clung to her, tears streaming down their faces. Her mother held her close, whispering prayers for her safety and happiness. Her father, his eyes filled with unshed tears, placed a small woven bird, a token of her skill and a reminder of home, in her hand. Then, with a final heart-wrenching embrace, Hasina climbed into the waiting carriage and was driven away, leaving a piece of her heart behind. Meanwhile, in the secluded wing of the palace, Prince Salim paced nervously. At 18, he was expected to marry, to produce an heir, to fulfill his royal duty. But Salim was different. Raised in cloistered luxury by overprotective parents, he had never known the company of anyone outside the palace walls, let alone a woman. He preferred the company of books and scrolls, the quiet rustle of parchment, more comforting than the boisterous chatter of the court. The thought of marriage, of sharing his life with someone he didn't know, filled him with a sense of overwhelming dread. His governess, Shireen, a stern woman with a sharp tongue and an even sharper gaze, constantly reminded him of his duty, her words like needles pricking at his already frayed nerves. He longed for a different life, a life where he could choose his own path, his own happiness. But such a life seemed impossible, a distant dream beyond his reach. He was a prince, and princes had no choice. The wedding ceremony was a blur of vibrant colors and hushed whispers. Hasina, dressed in silks she had never dreamed of touching, felt like a small boat adrift on a vast, unknown sea. She barely glimpsed Prince Salim, shrouded as he was in layers of regal finery. The ceremony concluded, and she was led to his private chambers, a grand suite adorned with intricate tapestries and gleaming furniture. The servants withdrew, leaving her alone with the prince. Salim, his face flushed, stood awkwardly by the window, fiddling with the sash of his elaborate robe. He cleared his throat several times, but no words came out. He'd practiced greetings and pleasantries with Shireen, but now, faced with the actual presence of a woman, his mind went blank. He picked up a small jeweled inkwell, intending to write a welcome message, but his trembling hand knocked it over. Thick black ink spilled across his pristine white robe, spreading like a dark stain. Hasina, witnessing his distress, couldn't help but laugh. It was a soft, gentle laugh, devoid of mockery. Salim looked up, startled. He expected anger, tears, perhaps even disgust. Instead, he saw amusement twinkling in her eyes. "It seems," Hasina said, her voice as soothing as the rustle of silk, "that even princes can be clumsy." Salim's tense shoulders relaxed slightly. He managed a small smile. I am not usually this clumsy," he stammered. Hasina stepped forward, offering a clean cloth. "Accidents happen," she said. "Let me help you." Together, they cleaned the ink stain, the shared task easing the awkwardness. As they worked, they began to talk. Salim, relieved to find Hasina so easy to speak with, confessed his nervousness and his lack of experience with everything. Hasina, in turn, spoke of her family, her love of weaving, and her dreams of one day opening a small workshop of her own. They talked for hours, the initial formality melting away. They discovered a shared love of art, a mutual appreciation for beauty, and a yearning for a simpler life. Salim spoke of his fascination with the stars, his desire to understand the mysteries of the universe. Hasina described the intricate patterns she wove, the stories they told, the emotions they conveyed. The night deepened, the moon casting long shadows across the room, yet neither of them noticed the passage of time. They were lost in conversation, discovering a connection they had never expected to find. The wedding night, meant for consummation, became a night of shared stories and whispered dreams, a night that laid the foundation for an unexpected friendship. The following morning, the sun streamed into Salim's chambers, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He awoke feeling lighter than he had in years. The previous night, instead of the dreaded consummation, he had spent hours talking with Hasina. He found himself drawn to her quiet strength, her gentle humor, and the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke of her craft. He decided to visit her in the weaving room. He found Hasina seated at a large loom, her fingers already moving rhythmically across the threads. She looked up as he approached, a small smile gracing her lips. "Good morning, Your Highness," she said, her voice soft. "Good morning, Hasina," Salim replied, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "May I watch you work?" Hasina nodded. "Of course, Your Highness. Come closer." Salim approached the loom, fascinated by the intricate dance of her fingers. He watched as she expertly manipulated the shuttle, weaving threads of vibrant colors into a complex pattern. He asked her about the different types of wool and silk, the meaning behind the designs, the process of dyeing the threads. Hasina patiently explained each step, her passion for her craft evident in her every word. "It looks difficult," Salim said, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It takes practice," Hasina replied, a twinkle in her eye. "Would you like to try?" Salim hesitated. He had never done anything remotely resembling manual labor, but the invitation in Hasina's eyes was too tempting to resist. "All right," he said, taking a deep breath. Hasina showed him how to hold the shuttle, how to pass it through the warp threads, how to create the basic knots. His first attempts were clumsy, his fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar tools. Hasina gently corrected his grip, her hand brushing against his, sending a surprising jolt through his arm. He glanced at her, but her gaze was focused on the loom. Slowly, with Hasina's patient guidance, Salim began to get the hang of it. The repetitive motion of the shuttle, the rhythmic clicking of the loom, had a calming effect on him. He found himself losing track of time, absorbed in the process of creation. As they worked side by side, Hasina told him stories of her family, of her childhood in the village, of the simple joys and hardships of their life. Salim listened intently, captivated by her tales. He learned about her younger siblings, the mischievous brother who loved to climb trees, the quiet sister who dreamed of becoming a healer. He learned about the struggles her family had faced, the sacrifices they had made. He realized that, despite his privileged upbringing, they shared a common thread, a deep love for their families, and a yearning for a life filled with purpose and meaning. The closeness of their bodies at the loom, the shared task, the intimate stories, created a bond between them that transcended their different backgrounds. The weaving room, once a place of solitude for Hasina, became a sanctuary for them both, a space where they could escape the pressures of the palace and connect on a deeper level. The prince, who had never touched a woman, found himself touching the hand of a weaver, and in that touch, he discovered a connection more profound than any he had ever imagined. Salim discovered a collection of poetry tucked away in a forgotten corner of the palace library. The verses spoke of love and loss, of nature's beauty and the mysteries of the human heart. He thought of Hasina, confined to the weaving room, her world limited to threads and looms. He wanted to share these words with her, to open her eyes to a world beyond the palace walls. He found her in the courtyard, a small patch of sunlight warming her face as she mended a tear in a tapestry. He sat beside her, the book of poems open, in his lap. "Hasina," he began, his voice a little hesitant, "would you like me to read you something?" Hasina looked up, her eyes curious. "What is it, Your Highness?" "Poetry," Salim replied, his fingers tracing the delicate script on the page. "It speaks of things, beautiful things." Hasina smiled. "I would like that very much." Salim began to read, his voice soft and melodic, the words weaving a tapestry of images and emotions. He read of soaring eagles and whispering winds, of shimmering deserts and starlit nights. He read of lovers parted and hearts reunited, of dreams realized and hopes dashed against the rocks of fate. Hasina listened intently, her eyes wide with wonder. The world he painted with his words was so different from her own, yet somehow familiar. She recognized the longing in the poet's voice, the yearning for something more, something beyond the confines of their everyday existence. When he finished reading, a silence settled between them, broken only by the gentle chirping of birds in the nearby trees. Hasina looked at him, her gaze filled with a newfound understanding. "Those words, they are like magic," she whispered. Salim smiled, his heart warmed by her appreciation. "They are a way of seeing the world, Hasina," he said. "A way of understanding the things we cannot see with our eyes." From that day forward, Salim shared his poetry with Hasina whenever they could steal a moment together. They would meet in the courtyards, hidden from the prying eyes of the palace staff, and lose themselves in the world of words. He read to her of ancient heroes and mythical creatures, of faraway lands and forgotten kingdoms. She, in turn, told him stories of her village, of the simple lives of the people she had left behind. They spoke of their dreams for the future. Salim confessed his desire to travel, to see the world beyond the palace walls, to learn about different cultures and customs. Hasina shared her hope of opening a weaving school, a place where women could learn a trade and earn their own living. As they talked, they discovered shared values and aspirations. They both believed in kindness and compassion, in the importance of hard work and the pursuit of knowledge. They both yearned for a life of meaning and purpose, a life beyond the confines of their current circumstances. Stolen glances across crowded rooms, whispered conversations in hidden corners, the brush of their hands as they passed each other. In the corridors, these small moments became precious treasures, fueling the growing connection between them. They were a prince and a weaver, worlds apart in status and upbringing, yet drawn together by an invisible thread of shared dreams and unspoken desires. The palace, once a symbol of confinement, began to feel like a shared sanctuary, a place where their unlikely friendship could blossom, hidden from the world, yet vibrant and alive. The palace gardens were a hidden oasis, a riot of color and fragrance. Tucked away behind high walls, fountains splashed in sun-dappled courtyards, and roses climbed trellised arches, their petals unfurling in the warm breeze. It was here, amidst the fragrant blossoms and the gentle murmur of water, that Salim and Hasina found solace from the rigid formality of palace life. One sunny afternoon, Salim led Hasina to a secluded corner of the garden, a hidden alcove shaded by a canopy of flowering vines. He had arranged a simple picnic, a basket filled with dates, figs, and small cakes. Hasina's eyes widened in surprise and delight as she saw the spread. "A picnic, Your Highness?" she asked, a smile lighting up her face. "Just Salim," he corrected gently. Here in the garden we can be ourselves, away from titles and formalities. Hasina nodded, her heart warmed by his words. They sat on a soft blanket, the fragrant blossoms perfuming the air around them. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily between them. Salim spoke of his frustration with the confines of the court, the endless ceremonies and the suffocating expectations. "I long to see the world, Hasina," he confessed, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "To travel beyond these walls, to experience life beyond the palace." Hasina listened patiently, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "I understand, Salim," she said softly. "I too have dreams that seem beyond my reach, but even small dreams can hold great power." She told him of her dream of opening a weaving school, a place where women could learn a trade and support themselves. She described her vision of a vibrant workshop, filled with the clatter of looms and the laughter of women working together. Salim listened intently, captivated by her passion and determination. "It is a noble dream, Hasina," he said, his eyes shining with admiration. "And I believe you can make it a reality." He spoke of the changes he wished to make within the palace, of his desire to improve the lives of the servants and reduce the extravagance of the court. He shared his frustration with the rigid hierarchy and the lack of compassion he witnessed among the nobles. Hasina encouraged him to speak up, to use his position to make a difference. "You have a good heart, Salim," she said, her gaze meeting his, "and a strong will. Don't be afraid to use them." Her words filled him with a newfound sense of hope. He realized that he was not alone in his desire for change. He had found an ally in Hasina, a kindred spirit who shared his values and his dreams. As the afternoon wore on, they talked of simpler things, of the beauty of the garden, the stories woven into the tapestries that adorned the palace walls, the memories of their childhoods. They laughed and shared stories, their bond deepening with each passing moment. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden. Salim reached out and took Hasina's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The touch sent a shiver of warmth through her arm. They sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. "Thank you, Hasina," Salim whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "for showing me that even within these walls there can be happiness." Hasina squeezed his hand gently. "Thank you, Salim," she replied, her voice equally soft, "for reminding me that even small dreams can take flight." They sat together, hand in hand, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. In that shared silence, in the quiet intimacy of their touch, the growing bond between them became undeniable, a fragile flower blooming in the hidden oasis of the palace gardens. Governess Shireen was a woman carved from ice. Her gaze was sharp, her words precise, and her demeanor unyielding. She had ruled Prince Salim's life since he was a child, dictating his every move, shaping his every thought. She believed that princes should be molded, not nurtured, and she had molded Salim into a quiet, obedient young man, easily swayed by her will. But lately a change had come over Salim. A spark had ignited in his eyes, a lightness in his step that Shireen had never seen before. And she knew the source of this transformation, the weaver, Hasina. Shireen had observed their growing closeness with a mixture of suspicion and disapproval. She saw the way Salim looked at Hasina, the warmth in his eyes, the gentle smile that played on his lips. She heard the laughter that echoed from the weaving room, the hushed conversations in the courtyards. This was not the obedient, pliable prince she had so carefully crafted. This was a young man awakening to his own desires, his own will, and Shireen would not tolerate it. She began her campaign subtly, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of the palace staff. She hinted that Hasina was manipulating the prince, using her charm to gain favor. She questioned Hasina's motives, suggesting that she was only interested in Salim's wealth and position. She reminded the servants of their place, of the importance of maintaining decorum and respecting the established hierarchy. "The prince is young and impressionable," she would say, her voice laced with concern. "He needs guidance, protection from those who would seek to take advantage of him." She made sure that her words reached the ears of the other weavers, whispering about Hasina's special treatment, her frequent visits from the prince. She sowed discord among the women, creating an atmosphere of envy and resentment. Shireen also began to restrict Hasina's access to Salim. She assigned her extra duties, keeping her busy in the weaving room, away from the prince's chambers. She invented new rules and regulations, citing propriety and tradition, to prevent them from meeting in the courtyards. When Salim asked about Hasina, Shireen would feign ignorance. "I haven't seen her, Your Highness," she would say, her voice smooth and unconcerned. She must be busy with her duties. She began to fill Salim's days with formal lessons and official duties, leaving him little time for his own pursuits. She invited prominent nobles to the palace, showcasing their daughters, eligible young women from prestigious families. She reminded Salim constantly of his duty to marry, to produce an heir, to secure the future of the kingdom. Salim, caught in the web of Shireen's manipulations, felt his newfound happiness slowly slipping away. He missed Hasina's company, her quiet strength, the way she made him laugh. He sensed the growing distance between them, the invisible barrier that Shireen was erecting. He tried to resist her control, to assert his own will, but years of obedience had weakened his resolve. He felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of expectations and the ever-present gaze of his governess. Shireen, watching Salim's growing frustration, smiled inwardly. She was slowly regaining her control, reasserting her dominance over the prince's life. Hasina, the weaver girl, was becoming a distant memory, a fleeting dream that Shireen would soon erase completely. The prince would be hers again, molded and shaped according to her will, and she would ensure that he remained firmly under her thumb, a puppet dancing to her tune, a prince who never truly lived. Shireen summoned Hasina to her private chambers, the summons delivered by a nervous young servant. Hasina's heart pounded in her chest as she walked through the long, echoing corridors. She knew Shireen did not approve of her friendship with Salim, but she had never been called to the governess's presence before. Shireen sat stiffly behind a large, ornate desk, her gaze cold and sharp. "Hasina," she began, her voice devoid of warmth, "I have observed your interactions with Prince Salim." Hasina lowered her gaze, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Yes, governess," she replied softly. "Such familiarity is inappropriate," Shireen continued, her voice rising slightly. "A prince and a weaver, it is simply not done. It compromises the prince's reputation, and by extension, the reputation of the entire royal family." Hasina's cheeks flushed with shame. "I understand, governess," she murmured. "Therefore," Shireen said, her voice firm and final, "I forbid you from seeing Prince Salim again. You will confine yourself to the weaving room and focus on your duties. Is that understood?" Hasina swallowed hard, her throat constricting with unshed tears. "Yes, governess," she whispered. She backed out of the room, her head bowed, her heart heavy with sadness. She returned to the weaving room, the vibrant colors of the threads now seeming dull and lifeless. The loom, once a source of comfort and creativity, now felt like a cage, trapping her in a world of silence and solitude. Salim, meanwhile, found himself increasingly isolated. Shireen filled his days with formal duties, lectures on history and politics, and meetings with visiting dignitaries. She monitored his every move, ensuring that he had no opportunity to seek out Hasina. He asked about her, but Shireen always had a ready excuse. "She is unwell," she would say, or "she is busy with a special commission." Salim knew Shireen was lying. He could feel the distance growing between him and Hasina, an invisible wall erected by his governess. He felt frustrated and helpless, trapped by the rigid protocols of palace life and the suffocating control of Shireen. But Salim and Hasina were not easily deterred. They found ways to communicate, small acts of defiance against Shireen's iron grip. Salim would leave small tokens for Hasina, a single flower tucked into the loom, a feather placed on her workbench, a smooth, colorful stone left near her water jug. Hasina, in turn, would weave small messages into the tapestries she was creating, hidden symbols and patterns that only Salim would understand. One day, Salim managed to slip a small folded note into Hasina's hand as she passed him in the corridor. It contained a single line of poetry, a verse that spoke of their shared longing and their unwavering hope. Hasina treasured the note, keeping it hidden in the folds of her dress, a reminder of Salim's affection and a source of strength during their enforced separation. They began to exchange letters, brief messages scribbled on scraps of parchment, passed through sympathetic servants who risked Shireen's wrath to help the young lovers. They wrote of their daily lives, their hopes and fears, their longing to be together. The letters became their lifeline, a fragile thread connecting them across the vast expanse of the palace. Their secret communication, though risky, filled them with a sense of shared rebellion, a small victory against Shireen's control. They knew their time together was limited, their future uncertain, but they clung to the hope that their love, like a delicate flower blooming in the shadows, would find a way to survive. Lady Farah arrived at the palace in a flurry of silks and jewels, her entourage filling the courtyard with chatter and laughter. She was the daughter of a powerful nobleman, a vision of elegance and refinement. Shireen, beaming with satisfaction, presented Farah to Salim as the perfect bride, a woman worthy of his royal status. "Observe, Your Highness," Shireen purred, gesturing towards Farah. "Her grace, her poise, her impeccable lineage. She is everything a princess should be." Shireen orchestrated a series of elaborate dinners and entertainments, showcasing Farah's accomplishments. Farah played the lute with skill, recited poetry with eloquence, and conversed with ease on matters of court and politics. Shireen made sure to highlight these accomplishments to Salim, contrasting them with Hasina's simple background and humble skills. "Lady Farah is a woman of culture and refinement, Your Highness," Shireen would say, her voice laced with subtle disapproval. "She understands the complexities of court life, the demands of your position. Can a simple weaver truly offer you the same?" Shireen began to plant seeds of doubt in Salim's mind about Hasina's motives. She hinted that Hasina's kindness was a facade, a calculated attempt to gain his favor and elevate her own position. "She is a clever girl, Your Highness," she whispered. "Do not be blinded by her charm. She knows what she wants, and she is not afraid to use her wiles to get it." Salim, though he still felt drawn to Hasina, found himself questioning her intentions. He had never considered the vast differences in their backgrounds, the chasm that separated a prince from a weaver. Shireen's words, like drops of poison, slowly seeped into his mind, eroding his trust in Hasina. Meanwhile, whispers began to circulate among the palace staff. The servants, always eager for gossip, spoke of Hasina's impending fate. They said that Shireen planned to send her away to a distant harem once Salim was betrothed to Lady Farah. The harem was a place of gilded cages, a prison for unwanted wives and concubines, a place where women withered and faded away, forgotten by the world. Hasina overheard these whispers as she walked through the palace corridors, her heart sinking with each word. She had hoped to earn her freedom, to return to her family, but now that hope seemed like a distant, impossible dream. The thought of being sent to the harem, of spending her days in enforced idleness, surrounded by women, consumed by bitterness and despair, filled her with dread. She felt trapped, her fate hanging precariously in the balance, her future determined by the whims of a woman who held her life in her hands. The palace, once a place of hope, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in around her, threatening to crush her spirit. Hasina's tears fell silently as she swept the courtyard, her heart heavy with despair. The whispers of the harem haunted her, a dark cloud hanging over her future. She felt utterly alone, lost in the vastness of the palace, a small boat adrift on a stormy sea. A kind voice broke through her despair. "Are you all right, Hasina?" Hasina looked up, startled. It was Yusef, one of the palace guards. He was a gentle giant of a man, known for his quiet demeanor and his unwavering kindness. He often stopped to chat with Hasina as she worked in the courtyard, asking about her family, her weaving, her dreams. He was one of the few people in the palace who treated her with respect, who saw her as a person, not just a servant. Hasina hesitated, unsure whether to confide in him. But the weight of her despair was too heavy to bear alone. I overheard the servants talking," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. They say Shireen plans to send me to the harem." Yusef's brow furrowed, in concern. "The harem?" he repeated, his voice grave. "That is not a good place for someone like you, Hasina." He had witnessed Shireen's machinations, her subtle manipulations, her cold indifference to the suffering of others. He had seen how she controlled Prince Salim, how she molded him to her will, how she stifled his spirit. He had also seen the change in Salim since Hasina's arrival, the spark in his eyes, the lightness in his step. He knew that Shireen saw Hasina as a threat, a disruption to her carefully constructed world. "Shireen, she is not what she seems," Yusef said, his voice low. "She has a way of making things happen, things that benefit her regardless of the cost to others." Hasina looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "What do you mean?" she asked. Yusef hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. He didn't want to frighten Hasina further, but he also felt a responsibility to warn her, to help her understand the danger she was in. "I have heard rumors," he said carefully, "stories of debts mysteriously appearing, of families forced to sell their daughters to the palace, stories of accidents befalling those who crossed Shireen's path." Hasina's heart sank. She remembered her family's sudden debt, the unexpected demand from the moneylender, the desperate decision to send her to the palace. Could Shireen have been behind it all? "My family's debt," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Could she have orchestrated it? Yusef looked at her, his gaze filled with compassion. "I do not know for certain, Hasina," he said gently, "but it is a possibility." He told her of other instances he had witnessed. Small incidents that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now, in light of Shireen's recent actions, took on a new meaning. He spoke of a servant who'd been dismissed after questioning Shireen's authority, a guard who had been reassigned after overhearing a private conversation, a merchant who had lost his contract with the palace after refusing to pay a bribe. As Yusef spoke, a seed of hope began to grow in Hasina's heart. If Shireen had orchestrated her family's debt, if she had manipulated events to bring Hasina to the palace, then perhaps there was a way to expose her, to unravel her web of deceit. "We need proof," Hasina said, her voice gaining strength. "If we can find evidence of her dealings, we can show Salim the truth." Yusef nodded. "I will help you, Hasina," he said firmly. "I have seen enough of Shireen's cruelty. It is time someone stood up to her." They discussed possible avenues of investigation, people they could talk to, records they could examine. It was a dangerous undertaking, they both knew, but the thought of exposing Shireen, of preventing her from sending Hasina to the harem, fueled their determination. The seeds of a plan had been sown, a fragile seedling of hope taking root in the darkness of the palace. Hasina, no longer a victim of circumstance, was becoming an agent of change, a quiet force determined to fight for her freedom and expose the truth. Salim found no solace in Lady Farah's company. Her laughter felt hollow, her conversation stilted. He longed for Hasina's quiet presence, her gentle humor, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke of her dreams. Shireen's constant praise of Farah only fueled his growing resentment. He felt like a pawn in a game he didn't understand, his life being orchestrated by others, his own desires disregarded. He began to spend more time in the palace library, seeking refuge in the company of books and scrolls. He reread his father's favorite poems, searching for a connection to the man he barely remembered. His father, the late Sultan, had been a kind and just ruler, beloved by his people. He had always encouraged Salim's curiosity, his love of learning. He had promised Salim that he would one day choose his own path, his own destiny. One afternoon, while browsing the library shelves, Salim stumbled upon a dusty, leather-bound volume. It was his father's will, a document he had never seen before. Shireen had always insisted that the will was a complex legal document, best left to the advisors and officials. She had discouraged Salim from reading it, saying it would only confuse him. But now, fueled by a growing suspicion, Salim decided to read it for himself. The language of the will was indeed complex, filled with legal jargon and formal pronouncements. But as Salim read, he began to notice certain passages, certain clauses that piqued his interest. He read of his father's desire for Salim to be a wise and just ruler, to lead with compassion and understanding. He read of his father's belief in the importance of education, of the power of knowledge to transform lives. Then, tucked away amidst the dense legal text, Salim found a hidden clause, a small paragraph that sent a jolt of surprise through his body. It stated that upon reaching his 19th birthday, Salim would have the right to choose his own bride, regardless of the arrangements made by the court. His father had granted him the freedom to choose his own partner, his own destiny. Salim reread the clause several times, his heart pounding in his chest. Shireen had lied to him. She had deliberately withheld this information, manipulating him, controlling his life for her own purposes. He felt a surge of anger, a wave of resentment that washed over him, erasing years of obedience and deference. He thought of Hasina, confined to the weaving room, her future threatened by Shireen's machinations. He thought of the joy they had shared, the dreams they had whispered in the hidden corners of the palace. He realized that Shireen had not only lied to him, but had also stolen his happiness, his chance at a life with the woman he was growing to love. He closed the book, his mind racing. He needed proof, evidence that Shireen had deliberately withheld this information. He needed to understand her motives, her reasons for controlling his life so completely. He began to search the library for other documents, other records that might shed light on Shireen's past, her dealings, her influence within the palace. His frustration grew with each passing hour. He felt like he was navigating a labyrinth, searching for a hidden exit, a way out of the web of deceit that Shireen had woven around him. He knew that confronting her would be dangerous, but he was no longer the quiet, obedient prince she had so carefully molded. He was a young man, awakening to his own power, his own will, and he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Yusef, true to his word, became Hasina's shadow, her protector and confidant. He used his position as a palace guard to gather information, discreetly questioning other servants. listening to whispered conversations, piecing together fragments of information like a weaver assembling a complex tapestry. He learned that the moneylender who had hounded Hasina's family had a history of dubious dealings, often appearing at the palace to collect debts owed by various members of the staff. He discovered that the moneylender had been seen meeting with Shireen on several occasions, their hushed conversations taking place in hidden corners of the palace gardens. Youssef shared this information with Hasina, fueling her growing suspicion that Shireen had orchestrated her family's debt. "We need proof," Hasina said, her voice firm despite the tremor of fear that ran through her. "Something tangible, something we can show to Salim." Youssef knew where to look. He had access to the palace archives, a vast repository of records and documents, everything from household accounts to official correspondence. He told Hasina to continue her work as usual, to avoid arousing suspicion, while he delved into the archives, searching for evidence of Shireen's dealings. Days turned into weeks as Youssef meticulously combed through the records. He worked late into the night, poring over dusty ledgers, deciphering cryptic entries, his eyes straining under the dim light of the oil lamps. Finally, his persistence paid off. He found a record of a large sum of money being transferred from Shireen's personal account to the moneylender. The transaction dated just weeks before Hasina's family had been forced to sell her to the palace. He also found a letter written in Shireen's own hand, instructing the moneylender to pressure Hasina's family for immediate payment. Youssef carefully copied the documents, his hands trembling with excitement and fear. He knew that possessing these papers was dangerous, that if Shireen discovered what he had done, his life would be forfeit. But he also knew that the truth had to be revealed, that Hasina's fate and perhaps even Salim's depended on it. He met Hasina in the secluded corner of the garden where they had shared their picnic, the place that had become their sanctuary. He handed her the copied documents, his gaze serious. "Be careful, Hasina," he warned. "These are dangerous secrets." Hasina took the papers, her fingers tracing the damning words. Her heart ached as she read Shireen's cold, calculating instructions, the evidence of her cruel manipulation laid bare before her eyes. She finally understood Shireen's motive. It wasn't simply about controlling Salim's life. It was about maintaining her own power and influence within the palace. By orchestrating Hasina's arrival, Shireen had hoped to create a situation where she could manipulate Salim, using his inexperience and his affection for Hasina to further her own agenda. Tears welled up in Hasina's eyes, tears of anger and sadness, but also tears of gratitude for Youssef's courage and loyalty. "Thank you, Youssef," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You have given me back my hope." She knew what she had to do. She had to show these documents to Salim, to reveal the truth about Shireen's machinations. It was a risky move, she knew, but it was her only chance. She had to trust that Salim would believe her, that he would choose love and truth over manipulation and deceit. The fate of their future, the possibility of a life together, rested on his decision. Salim's discovery of the hidden clause in his father's will ignited a fire within him. He felt betrayed, manipulated, and a fool for blindly trusting Shireen for so long. He paced his chambers, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. He reread the clause, tracing the words with his finger, as if to confirm their reality. His father had trusted him, had granted him the freedom to choose his own path, yet Shireen had stolen that freedom, had kept him imprisoned in a cage of her own making. He thought of Hasina, her laughter, her quiet strength, the way she looked at him with such open honesty. He remembered the joy he had felt in her company, the connection they had shared, the dreams they had whispered in the hidden corners of the palace. Shireen had not only deceived him, but had also tried to rob him of the one person who had brought true happiness into his life. He had to confront Shireen, to demand answers, to expose her lies. But he knew that a direct confrontation would be futile. Shireen was cunning, manipulative, and she held considerable power within the palace. He needed a plan, a strategy that would expose her deceit and reclaim his freedom. He decided to seek the counsel of the palace librarian, a wizened old man named Omar. Omar had served his father for many years, and Salim trusted his wisdom and discretion. He slipped out of his chambers, avoiding the watchful eyes of the palace guards, and made his way to the library. He found Omar surrounded by stacks of ancient scrolls, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Omar," Salim began, his voice low and urgent, "I need your help." He explained his discovery of the hidden clause in his father's will, his suspicions about Shireen's motives, his desire to expose her deceit. Omar listened patiently, his wise old eyes filled with concern. "Shireen has always been ambitious," Omar said, his voice barely a whisper. "She craves power, influence. She sees you, Your Highness, as a means to an end." He confirmed Salim's suspicions, revealing that Shireen had indeed been instrumental in arranging his betrothal to Lady Farah, securing the support of Farah's powerful family to further strengthen her own position within the court. "But how can I prove it?" Salim asked, his voice laced with frustration. "She is clever. She leaves no trace of her manipulations." Omar thought for a moment, his fingers stroking his long white beard. "There are other records," he said slowly. "Documents that Shireen may have overlooked. Financial transactions. Correspondence with Lady Farah's family. Perhaps even letters to the moneylenders who prey on the palace staff." He suggested that Salim search the royal archives, a vast repository of documents that Shireen rarely visited. He offered to help Salim navigate the archives, to guide him through the labyrinth of records and ledgers. Salim felt a surge of hope. With Omar's help, he might be able to find the evidence he needed to expose Shireen's lies. He thanked Omar profusely and returned to his chambers, his mind racing with plans. He spent the next few days poring over the palace archives, guided by Omar's expert knowledge. They worked in secret, meeting late at night, when the palace was quiet and the risk of discovery was minimal. They sifted through mountains of documents, searching for any trace of Shireen's dealings, any evidence of her manipulations. Finally, their efforts bore fruit. They found a series of letters exchanged between Shireen and Lady Farah's father, outlining the terms of their agreement, the promises of power and influence that Shireen had made in exchange for their support. They also discovered records of large sums of money being transferred from Shireen's personal accounts to various individuals within the palace, payments for their silence and complicity. Salim felt a mixture of anger and satisfaction as he held the incriminating documents in his hands. He finally had the proof he needed to confront Shireen, to expose her treachery, and to reclaim his freedom. He knew that the confrontation would be dangerous, that Shireen would fight to maintain her control, but he was no longer afraid. He had the truth on his side and the unwavering support of Hasina and Youssef. He was ready to fight for his future, for his happiness, for the woman he loved. He would confront Shireen, not as the timid, obedient prince she had molded, but as a man determined to forge his own destiny. Salim summoned Shireen to his private chambers, his voice calm but firm. He had chosen a time when the palace was relatively quiet, the midday sun casting long shadows across the courtyards. He wanted no witnesses to this confrontation, no distractions from the task at hand. He sat behind his father's large, ornate desk, the incriminating documents spread out before him. He felt a tremor of nervousness, but his resolve remained firm. Shireen entered the room, her usual air of authority slightly diminished. She sensed the change in Salim, a new firmness in his gaze, a quiet strength she had never seen before. "You summoned me, Your Highness?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes, Shireen," Salim replied, his voice level. I have something to show you. He pushed the documents across the desk towards her, his gaze fixed on her face. Shireen picked up the papers, her brow furrowing as she scanned the contents. The color drained from her face as she recognized her own handwriting, the damning words of her secret agreements laid bare before her eyes. "Where did you get these?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "That is not important," Salim replied, his voice gaining strength. "What is important is what these documents reveal. They reveal your lies, your manipulations, your betrayal of my trust." He pointed to the clause in his father's will, the words that granted him the right to choose his own bride. "You knew about this, Shireen," he said, his voice rising slightly. "You deliberately withheld this information from me, controlling my life for your own purposes." Shireen's composure began to crack. "That clause, it is irrelevant," she stammered. "Your father was unwell when he wrote it. It does not hold any legal weight." "Do not insult my father's memory," Salim said, his voice sharp. "He was a wise and just ruler, and his will is his final testament. You, Shireen, have twisted his words, manipulated his intentions for your own gain." He confronted her with the evidence of her dealings with Lady Farah's family, the promises of power and influence she had made in exchange for their support. He showed her the records of the payments she had made to silence those who might have exposed her. Schemes. Shireen's face turned pale, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. She attempted to deny the accusations, to deflect the blame, but the evidence was overwhelming. "It was for your own good, Your Highness," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Lady Farah is a suitable bride, a woman of noble birth. The weaver. Girl, she is not fit to be a princess. You have no right to judge Hasina," Salim said, his voice filled with anger. "She is a woman of integrity and kindness, a woman I have come to respect and admire." He spoke of Hasina's strength, her resilience, her unwavering loyalty. He described the joy he had found in her company, the connection they had shared, the dreams they had built together. Shireen's defiance crumbled. She realized that her game was up, her web of deceit unraveled. She sank into a chair, her shoulders slumped, her gaze fixed on the floor. The ice that had encased her for so long melted away, revealing the fear and desperation that lay beneath. She had lost. The prince she had so carefully molded had finally broken free from her control. The raised voices drew the attention of the palace guards stationed outside the chamber doors. Yusef, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation, signaled to the other guards. They cautiously opened the doors, revealing the scene within. Shireen, slumped in a chair, her face ashen, looked up in alarm as the guards entered. Salim, his face flushed with anger, turned to address them. "Guards!" he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "I have discovered evidence of treachery within the palace. Governess Shireen has manipulated me, deceived me, and conspired against the interests of the royal family." He held up the incriminating documents, his hand trembling slightly. "She has orchestrated events to benefit herself, regardless of the cost to others. She has lied to me about my father's will, and she has attempted to separate me from the woman I care for." The guards exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes darting between Salim and Shireen. They had witnessed Shireen's iron grip on the prince's life, her unquestioned authority within the palace. They had also seen the change in Salim since Hasina's arrival, the spark of happiness that Shireen had tried so hard to extinguish. Yusef stepped forward, his gaze firm. "Your Highness," he said, his voice respectful but unwavering, "I can corroborate your accusations. I have witnessed Governess Shireen's manipulative behavior, her cruel treatment of the palace staff, and her attempts to isolate you from Hasina." He recounted the incidents he had witnessed, the subtle manipulations, the veiled threats, the disappearances of those who had crossed Shireen's path. He spoke of the evidence he had uncovered, the financial transactions, the secret agreements, the web of deceit that Shireen had woven around the prince. Other servants, emboldened by Yusef's courage, stepped forward to share their own stories of Shireen's cruelty and manipulation. They spoke of stolen wages, unfair punishments, and the constant fear of reprisal. The room buzzed with whispered accusations, the truth about Shireen's machinations finally coming to light. Shireen, realizing that her reign of control was over, made a last, desperate attempt to defend herself. "These are lies," she hissed, her voice filled with venom. "Fabrications designed to discredit me. I have served the royal family faithfully for years, and I would never betray their trust." But her words fell on deaf ears. The evidence against her was too strong, the testimonies too compelling. The guards, now convinced of her guilt, moved to detain her. Shireen struggled against their grip, her face contorted with rage and despair. Salim watched as Shireen was led away, her protests echoing through the corridors. He felt a sense of relief, a weight lifting from his shoulders. He had finally broken free from her control, reclaimed his freedom, and exposed the truth. He turned to the assembled servants, his gaze sweeping across their faces. "I have a further announcement to make," he said, his voice clear and strong. "I intend to marry Hasina, the weaver." A gasp rippled through the room, followed by a murmur of surprise and excitement. Salim's declaration was unexpected, a bold defiance of tradition and expectation. He spoke of his love for Hasina, her kindness, her strength, the way she had brought light and laughter into his life. He described the connection they shared, the dreams they had built together, the future they hoped to create. "Hasina is not just a weaver," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "She is a woman of remarkable character, a woman worthy of my love and respect. She is the woman I choose to be my wife, my partner, my queen." He sent for Hasina, his heart pounding with anticipation. He wanted to share this moment with her, to declare his love publicly, to show the world that he had chosen her, not out of duty or obligation, but out of love and respect. Hasina entered the room, her eyes wide with surprise as she saw the assembled crowd, the guards, the servants, their faces filled with a mixture of curiosity and excitement. Salim stepped forward, his gaze meeting hers. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, a silent affirmation of their bond. "Hasina," he said, his voice soft yet firm, "I love you. Will you be my wife?" Tears welled up in Hasina's eyes, tears of joy and relief. She looked at Salim, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "Yes, Salim," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, I will." The news of Salim's declaration spread through the palace like wildfire. Whispers filled the corridors, the servants buzzing with excitement and speculation. The older, more traditional members of the court muttered their disapproval, clinging to the rigid customs and hierarchies that governed palace life. But the younger generation, and many of the servants who had witnessed Shireen's cruelty, celebrated Salim's bold decision, seeing it as a sign of hope, a promise of change. Salim, with Omar's guidance, formally invoked the clause in his father's will, asserting his right to choose his own bride. The royal advisors, initially hesitant, were swayed by the overwhelming evidence of Shireen's manipulations and the growing support for Salim's decision. They recognized the wisdom in honoring the late Sultan's wishes, and they saw the potential for a more just and compassionate rule under Salim's leadership. Shireen, stripped of her authority and her influence, was formally dismissed from her position. She left the palace in disgrace, her departure met with a mixture of relief and satisfaction by those who had suffered under her cruel reign. With Shireen's removal, a sense of liberation swept through the palace. The servants, no longer burdened by fear and intimidation, began to speak more freely. their voices filled with a newfound sense of hope. The rigid formality that had characterized palace life began to soften, replaced by a more relaxed and welcoming atmosphere. Salim officially nullified his arranged betrothal to Lady Farah, explaining his decision with honesty and respect. Lady Farah, though initially disappointed, understood Salim's desire to follow his heart. She admired his courage and his commitment to justice, and she wished him and Hasina happiness. Hasina's servitude was formally ended, her contract torn up. In a symbolic act of liberation, she was no longer a weaver bound to the looms, but a free woman, her future her own to shape. Salim and Hasina celebrated their newfound freedom with a quiet dinner in the secluded corner of the garden, the place where their unlikely friendship had blossomed. They sat on a soft blanket surrounded by fragrant blossoms, the gentle murmur of the fountain filling the air. They talked of their dreams for the future, their plans for a life together, their shared desire to make the palace a more just and compassionate place. "I want to create a weaving school, Salim," Hasina said, her eyes shining with excitement. "A place where women can learn a trade, earn their own living and express their creativity." Salim smiled, his heart warmed by her passion. "It is a noble dream, Hasina," he said, taking her hand in his, "and I will support you every step of the way." He spoke of his plans to reform the court protocols, to reduce the exploitation of the servants, to create a more equitable and humane environment within the palace walls. He wanted to create a kingdom where everyone, regardless of their status or background, was treated with dignity and respect. They sat in silence for a moment, their hands clasped tightly together, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. They watched the sunset together, their hearts filled with gratitude and hope. They had faced challenges, overcome obstacles, and emerged from the shadows stronger and more united than ever before. They had found love in the most unexpected of places, a love that had defied tradition, challenged authority, and transformed their lives forever. They were a prince and a weaver, their destinies intertwined, their future a tapestry of shared dreams and unwavering love. The wedding of Prince Salim and Hasina was a celebration unlike any Shiraz had ever seen. The entire city was invited to witness the union, a testament to Salim's desire for a more open and inclusive rule. Gone were the hushed whispers and veiled secrecy of court ceremonies. Instead, the palace courtyard overflowed with music, laughter, and the vibrant colors of celebration. Hasina, radiant in a gown woven with threads of gold and silver, stood beside Salim, his eyes shining with love and pride. They exchanged vows, not of obedience and duty, but of mutual respect and shared dreams. The crowd cheered, their voices echoing through the courtyard, a chorus of approval for this unconventional yet heartwarming union. In the weeks that followed, Hasina's weaving school became a reality. A bright, airy room in the palace was transformed into a vibrant workshop, filled with the clatter of looms and the hum of busy hands. Women from all walks of life, from the highest-ranking ladies of the court to the humblest palace servants, gathered to learn the art of weaving from Hasina. She taught them not only the technical skills, but also the stories and traditions woven into each pattern, empowering them with knowledge and a sense of pride in their craft. The women laughed and shared stories as they worked, their fingers flying across the threads, creating tapestries of vibrant colors and intricate designs. They earned a fair wage for their work, giving them a sense of independence and financial security. The weaving school became a place of community, a space where women could learn, create, and support one another. Salim, true to his word, initiated a series of reforms to improve the lives of the palace servants. He increased their wages, reduced their working hours, and provided them with opportunities for education and advancement. He established a system of fair grievance procedures, ensuring that their voices were heard and their concerns addressed. He replaced the harsh punishments and arbitrary dismissals of the past with a system of restorative justice, focusing on rehabilitation and reconciliation. The servants, once treated as invisible cogs in the palace machinery, now felt valued and respected, their contributions acknowledged and appreciated. The atmosphere within the palace shifted, the air of fear and resentment replaced by a sense of shared purpose and mutual respect. Years passed, and the reign of Salim and Hasina became a golden age for Shiraz. Their rule was characterized by justice, compassion, and a deep commitment to the well-being of their people. Hasina's weaving school flourished, its graduates creating exquisite tapestries that adorned the palace and were traded throughout the land. The palace, once a symbol of exclusivity and privilege, became a hub of creativity and learning, a place where people from all walks of life could come together to share their skills and celebrate their talents. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Salim and Hasina sat in their private garden, watching their children play amongst the fragrant blossoms. Their son, a bright and inquisitive boy, was fascinated by the stars, just like his father. Their daughter, a quiet and thoughtful girl, loved to weave intricate patterns just like her mother. They watched their children with love and pride, their hearts filled with gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them together. They had defied tradition, challenged authority, and built a life together based on mutual respect, shared dreams, and unwavering love. The prince, who had never touched a woman, had found his soulmate in a weaver, and together they had woven a tapestry of love, justice, and hope that would enrich their kingdom for generations to come.